All right, good evening. I call to order the Wetlands Board. The responsibility of this board is to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to preserve the wetlands and to accommodate economic activity so as to prevent their despoliation. May I have a roll call?
Mr. Roadley?
Here.
Mr. Waltrip?
Here.
Mr. Gussman?
Here.
Mr. Lukens?
Here.
Mr. Dunn?
Here. Everyone's had an opportunity to review the minutes from April 13th board meeting.
Minutes look fine to me.
Minutes are accepted. For the public hearings, for the information of everyone in attendance tonight, the outline for the public hearings will be a staff presentation followed by any questions or clarifications from the board. Then the public hearing will be opened. At that time, anybody wishing to speak may do so once called upon by the chair, and all public speakers must state their name and address for the record. After everyone wishing to speak has done so, the public hearing will be closed and the discussion amongst the board members will start. The first presentation will be for WJPA-22-0009 at 213 South Point Drive. Ms. Robin Benedict, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. My name is Robin Benedict, Watershed Planner for James City County. Again, this is WJPA 22-0009. Ms. Carla Havens from Mid-Atlantic Resource Consulting has applied for a wetlands permit on behalf of Mr. James and Ms. Patricia Mishler to install a kayak launch with 2 groins and beach nourishment on property located at 213 South Point Drive within the College Creek Watershed. Here you can see the parcel outlined in blue and College Creek Watershed outlined in yellow. The applicants are proposing to construct a kayak launch area with 2 15-foot timber groins and beach nourishment. This area of beach nourishment is proposed to include approximately 10 cubic yards of beach sand and is to be planted with Spartina alterniflora on 24-inch centers, while approximately 150 square feet of non-vegetated wetlands are proposed to be impacted associated with the construction of the groins and beach nourishment. This project does not include any clearing, grading, or impacts to vegetated wetlands. This project is proposed between mean low water and mean high water. Therefore, this project must be heard by the Wetlands Board. On the screen, you'll see the aerial view of the proposed project area. Here's the topography at the site, which is fairly steep getting down to the water. And here is the proposed site plan. You can see mean high water and mean low water, as well as the groin installation and proposed kayak launch with the area of beach nourishment adjacent to it. This gives a better view. The house will be to the left. The area of beach nourishment is shown in the yellow area, steps down to the proposed pier, the kayak launch to the right, and then the sill installation above. Site photography looking down towards the area of work, the area of beach nourishment, as published in the Virginia Register on July 11, 2005, the revised Wetland Mitigation Compensation Policy and Supplemental Guidelines, Regulation 4 VAC 20-390-10, Virginia, as a Chesapeake Bay program partner, is committed to achieve a no net loss of existing wetlands acreage and function in the signatories' regulatory programs. In order for a proposed project to be authorized to impact wetlands and compensate for the wetland loss in some prescribed manner, the following 3 criteria must be met. All reasonable mitigative efforts, including alternative siting, which would eliminate or minimize wetland loss or disturbance, must be incorporated into the proposal. The proposal must be clearly water dependent in nature, and the proposal must demonstrate clearly its needs to be in the wetlands and its overwhelming public and private benefits. If the proposed project cannot meet one or more of the above criteria, the project must be denied or must occur in areas outside of the wetlands. Should it satisfy all 3 criteria, however, compensation for the wetland loss is required. The sequence of acceptable mitigation options should be as follows: on-site, off-site within the same watershed, mitigation banks in the same watershed, or a payment of an in lieu fee. If compensation is required, it should be a condition of the permit. Staff has reviewed this application and finds that this project meets the 3 criteria outlined above. There are no anticipated vegetated wetland impacts associated with this proposal, therefore mitigation is not a requirement of this permit. However, the applicant has already proposed the plantings of Spartina alterniflora as beach nourishment. Staff has reviewed the above application and recommends approval of the application as presented. Should the board wish to approve the application, staff suggests the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicants must obtain all other necessary local, state, and/or federal permits required for the project. All development activities located in the special flood hazard area shall comply with Article 6, Division 3, floodplain area regulations of the James City County zoning ordinance and received all required approval and permits prior to the commencement of such activities. The installation of smooth cordgrass or Spartina alterniflora to be planted 2 foot on center in the area of beach nourishment. And a surety of $300 be paid and in place prior to commencement of work in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee the beach nourishment plantings. The wetlands permit for this project shall expire on June 8th, 2025 if construction is not begun, and if an extension of the permit is needed, a written request shall be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than April 27th, 2025, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this time.
I have a quick question. Just could you restate, you said there was no vegetated impacts to the wetlands?
Correct.
The application shows a proposed pier. I note that there is an existing pier. Are they just rebuilding the pier?
Yes, one pier, the existing pier is going to be taken down and then a new pier in this new position.
Questions for staff?
Who is the contractor going to join us?
Ms. Carla Havens?
Who's the contractor?
I do not know, sir.
All right, thank you, Ms. Benedict. We will now open the public hearings. Is there anybody here who would like to speak on this matter?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'm Carla Havens with Mid-Atlantic Resource Consulting, 1095 Cherry Row Lane, Shacklefords, Virginia, 23156. The contractor is Wilbur Jordan with Jordan Marine Construction. We met on site, and if you've been there, you notice how steep the topography is, and there's a heavy tree canopy. So there's limited marsh growing along their side of College Creek. They are on the deep side of the channel. If you look on the other side, that's where the extensive, expansive Spartina alterniflora marsh is. So we know it will grow, it just needs the right conditions. They wanted a canoe launch. They have an erosion problem. So we're kind of doing this, it's a little bit of an experiment and just combining a bunch of things all in the same side. The pier piles on the downstream side will be utilized as part of the, it would be the upstream side of the L-shaped canoe or kayak launch. And then we'll have another one downstream, L-shaped, nourished so that the sand stays in place because there's not a whole lot of literal drift along that section of the creek. We're going to plant it to keep the sand in place and hold it in place, and they can use it as their canoe and kayak launch, and it will solve the erosion problem, hopefully, for that small stretch there. And based on what happens, if it becomes stabilized, we may be back before you in the future with additional nourishment and limbing up activities.
Had you considered a different form of the living shoreline, groins, holding that in place is one option. There are other options. Just curious.
We thought about stone, but the base width, the deeper the water, the wider the base width, and all of a sudden you're eating up a whole lot of area with a lot of stone. So living shorelines can still involve timber groins, and this is a really small project. It's 10 feet by 15 feet. Again, it serves their kayak access request. We're going to get the vines and the ivy and the greenbrier out of there, get some sunlight in there, and hopefully this will all be a positive sort of end result.
Can you describe the sort of bulkhead arrangement that's retaining the fill?
It's just a timber groin, it's low profile, and the dimensions on it, it extends 15 feet out into the water. They're spaced parallel to one another, 10 feet apart. The ones on the upstream side will be using the proposed pier piles, and then it'll just be sheeting on 10 foot down.
You have the vertical piles and then just timber.
Yes, with a
tied to
cap
those
on it.
horizontal.
Yeah, and it's low profile. Yeah, so it's not going to starve the downstream side. And then the entire interior, 150 square feet, will be sprigged with the Spartina alterniflora, which we know will grow because it's lush on the other side of the creek.
Any other questions? Thank you. Anybody else who'd like to speak on this matter? All right, if not, I'm going to close the public hearing. And discussions amongst the board.
It's a different approach than we've seen for living shorelines. Different. Groins don't have a tremendous track record in Virginia in different settings because they tend to get flanked. I don't think that's what we're experiencing here. I think if there's moderate or minimal erosion along the shoreline, the sand and plantings may help correct that. In different settings, I might not be so encouraged to approve the use of groins. I'd rather see the traditional living shoreline approach. But in this case, given its small footprint, I don't have a huge objection to the project.
Agree. Anyone like to make a motion?
Make a motion. I'll make a motion to adopt a resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake, for the Wetlands Board case WJPA 22-0009 at 213 South Point Drive.
Motion to adopt. Mr. Roadley?
Yes?
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes. Motion passes or is adopted. The next case, WJPA-22-0010 at 3181 Derby Lane. Mr. Trevor Long.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Long, Watershed Planner, here to present WJPA-22-0010. Ms. Carla Havens of Mid-Atlantic Resource Consulting has applied for a wetlands permit on behalf of Mr. Glenn Horner to construct a stone revetment and breakwater with beach nourishment on property located at 3181 Derby Lane within the James River watershed. You can see this parcel above on your screens outlined here in blue with the watershed break here in purple. Again, this property is right on the James River, which is the body of water adjacent to this parcel. Existing conditions of the property include a series of breakwaters, a highly eroded beach area that has been diminished over the past 5 years, a failed bulkhead, and a concrete wall adjacent to an existing patio area. On June 10th, 2020, an application appeared before the Wetlands Board for the construction of a bulkhead at this property to mitigate for some of this beach and shoreline erosion. This bulkhead was approved and constructed, however, has since begun to fail. The applicant is proposing to remove the existing vinyl bulkhead and construct a 6-foot by 210-foot quarry stone and concrete rubble revetment with filter cloth against the existing concrete wall landward of the bulkhead to mitigate for upland erosion. Also existing on the property is a series of offshore breakwaters. The applicant is proposing an additional 12-foot by 55-foot breakwater landward of the most northern two breakwaters that will include approximately 3,600 square feet of beach nourishment and sprigging. This project is proposed between mean low water and mean high water. Therefore, this project must be heard by the Wetlands Board. A little bit of information about the site. Some topography for the proposed site and the floodplain. The site plan, as I was describing, this is the proposed breakwater. As you can see, there are a series of breakwaters existing on this site. Area of rock is outlined here in yellow. So with this square being the breakwater and the furthest one on your screen being the proposed revetment. The concrete wall that I was speaking of is just behind this proposed revetment. This concrete wall holds a patio area that is beginning to see failures structurally. In orange here is an area of beach nourishment. The contractor has agreed to sprig portions of the tombolo feature associated with the breakwater and leave areas as a natural or a recreational styled beach as well. Mean high water is here in purple and in blue on this side of the breakwater system. Blue and purple are the new mean high and mean low waters. And here's a cross section of the revetment portion. In areas where the project is proposed outside of the concrete wall, this is the cross section. So a little bit of cut in order to establish a stable grade. And in the area where the concrete wall nearly interfaced the existing vinyl bulkhead area, the revetment will come all the way up to the concrete wall. And here's a cross section of the proposed breakwater, and in yellow, and in green being the area of beach nourishment and sprigging. A couple of site photographs. This is the existing bulkhead or vinyl wall. In this area, you can see where it is beginning to fail. A look out towards the existing two breakwaters. This one is a little bit hard to see, but the new breakwater is proposed inland of the two, but in between the northernmost breakwaters. This is the area of revetment. As you can see, this portion of the property is experiencing upland erosion or shoreline erosion here. It's cutting in back behind the vinyl bulkhead and to adjacent property owners. Looking out, this is the area, these PVC pipes would represent the new bulkhead. And the area in between these four would be where the beach nourishment will go with some sprigging. A good shot of the failure of the vinyl bulkhead and its exposure to the concrete wall behind it. There's a decently significant amount of threat to that concrete wall due to this erosion issue. As published in the Virginia Register on July 11th, 2005, the revised Wetland Mitigation Compensation Policy and Supplemental Guidelines, Regulation 4 VAC 20-390-10, Virginia, as a Chesapeake Bay program partner, is committed to achieve a no net loss of existing wetlands acreage and function in the program in the signatories' regulatory programs. In order for a proposed project to be authorized to impact wetlands and compensate for the wetland loss in some prescribed manner, the following three criteria must be met. All reasonable mitigative efforts, including alternative siting, which would eliminate or minimize wetland loss or disturbance, must be incorporated in the proposal. The proposal must clearly be water dependent in nature, and the proposal must demonstrate clearly its need to be in the wetlands and its overwhelming public and private benefits. If the proposed project cannot meet one or more of the above criteria, the project must be denied or must occur in areas outside of the wetlands. Should it satisfy all three criteria, however, compensation for the wetland loss is required. The sequence of acceptable mitigation options should be as followed: on-site, off-site within the same watershed, mitigation banks in the same watershed, or a payment of an in lieu fee. If compensation is required, it should be a condition of this permit. Staff has reviewed the application and finds that this project meets the 3 criteria outlined above. There are no anticipated vegetated wetland impacts associated with this proposal, therefore, mitigation is not a requirement of this permit. However, the applicant has proposed to revegetate the area of beach nourishment associated with the Tombolo feature with wetland plantings. Staff has reviewed the above application and recommends approval of the application as presented. Should the board wish to approve the application, staff suggests the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary local, state, and/or federal permits required for the project. That all development activities located in the special flood hazard area shall comply with Article 6, Division 3 floodplain area regulations of the James City County zoning ordinance and receive all required approval and permits prior to the commencement of such activities. That the installation of smooth cordgrass, Spartina alterniflora, or an equivalent wetland species be planted on 2-foot centers in the area of beach nourishment. A surety of $300 be paid in place prior to the commencement of work in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee the beach nourishment plantings. That this wetlands permit for the project shall expire on June 8th, 2025 if construction has not begun, and that if an extension of the permit is needed, a written request shall be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than April 27th, 2025, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. Thank you. Be happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Thank you, Mr. Long.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll open the public hearing. Would the applicant or the representative like to speak?
Mr. Chairman, Carla Havens again with Mid-Atlantic Resource Consulting. Thank you, Trevor. Thanks for the ground shots. Just wanted to point out 2 things. The existing concrete pieces that have eroded out from underneath the existing concrete wall, those will be broken up and used as core material, so they're not going to be taken off site. If there's any rebar or asphalt or inappropriate material, that will be removed from the site. Additionally, when we met on site, we had a neighborhood meeting basically, just to explain to the neighborhood what was proposed. And there was, somebody questioned the validity of the design. So VIMS came out to the site, Lyle Varnell with VIMS came out, and I just want to read a portion of his letter into the record, and then I will give you the record, the letter for the record. The existing breakwater, and this is dated July 3rd. Oh, it says July 3rd, but it should be June 3rd, because we're not in July yet. The existing breakwaters were constructed and fully nourished with sand in the late 1980s. Since then, they have been unable to retain sand as expected. The sand deflated and generally retreated rapidly after construction. Therefore, this proposed project provides supplementary approaches to protect the concrete bulkhead, which protects a large upland patio and adjacent upland lawn. The proposed inter-Tombolo breakwater with landward sand nourishment, the riprap revetment along the upland, and stone toe protection along the base of the concrete bulkhead appears sufficient to address the current shoreline stabilization issues. So with that, I'll give you this.
Thank you.
It may look a little complicated on paper, but it's basically a revetment up against the failing concrete wall, a breakwater out in between an inset, nourishment, and sprigging.
What happened with the vinyl bulkhead? Why did the vinyl bulkhead fail?
That's a good question. I didn't see a tieback system on it. I think it was done as an emergency kind of thing. That's pretty much all I know about the vinyl. And that will come out. And then the revetment will go in and hopefully it will forever be stabilized.
Trevor, but we permitted that, right? Was it not constructed according to the, the guidelines or what we approved, the plans we approved?
As far as the location and where the Wetlands Board approved it, I believe everything went in accordingly. Now, how deep the footers or the vinyl bulkhead was dug, I'm not aware of. So that could have been one issue, or maybe it was the incorrect approach for the wave action coming in. But ultimately, I'm not 100% positive why the vinyl bulkhead failed.
This is pretty rare that something like this comes back that quickly, for something to fail.
Certainly. Also not aware of, off the top of my head, I can't recall who the contractor was for the vinyl bulkhead. Okay. I believe the applicant who did put the bulkhead in is here, so he may be better equipped to speak on how it was constructed and perhaps why it failed.
Thank you.
Carla, I appreciate you having VIMS take a look at the project. One of the questions that emerged during our site visit was just looking at this reach of shoreline, not just this property, but beyond the property boundaries. We have some breakwater structures that appear to be functioning properly or effectively, maybe is a better word, in retaining sand. I don't know if they're in a transition. I know that there appears to be a net drift, at least at this time of year, in a downstream direction. And I was curious, were the events that were causing the deflation associated with point-in-time storm events, or has this been a gradual loss over many years that's just taken us to this point? Do you have any insight into that?
I have my idea of what's going on out there, and Lyle and Scott Hardaway looked back way into the history. And I don't know if you noticed when you were out there, if you look upstream, there is a huge groin with a spur on it. It's so oversized. I don't know who designed it, I don't know who permitted, but it's there. And Scott and Lyle felt that it was not stealing sand, it was not impacting this section of the breakwaters. And I just find that so difficult to believe. Something that huge has got to impact what's going on.
That's why I asked if this was associated with particular events that caused rapid deflation, or if it's more gradual. I had the same observation. And these were some of the original breakwaters, if
Yes.
memory serves me, in Virginia.
Late 80s.
Yeah.
Yep, the first groin field that went in.
Looking back at some of the Google Earth images, I think 2017, maybe May or June of 2017, you can see there was very good lighting, and you could see a lot of turbidity in that water, and see basically a flow coming up from just downstream of this particular beach area. I mean, not necessarily flowing in, but a lot of movement of apparently sediment-bearing water. So I guess it's and in addition, I think the original owner of this property actually excavated out the hillside that came down to the water to put in that patio area. And so perhaps you've got, a lot of runoff up there, or some groundwater that's giving you a very fragile, fragile shoreline there. Maybe that's why the vinyl breakwater, didn't have as good a footing as it should have had. And I think you've also got a lot of energy in that little bay area, because you look at the adjacent properties just one or two away, and those bulkheads appear to be working. There has been some some erosion of the tomolos in those areas, but they're doing a much better job than these particular ones. And It's worth some graduate student's study, you know, but it would take a few years.
And as Scott Hardaway with Vim says, an aerial photo is a picture of one point in time.
Yes, yes.
Who knows what happened after that, or, you know, a week, a month, a year.
Yeah.
They are definitely interesting to look at.
Is the length of sheeting that was,
I have no idea.
probably wasn't put down deep enough. And with all the hurricanes and the location on the river, it takes a heck of a pounding there.
Oh, absolutely, and
that-
as you know,
And if it's not put down deep, it will come out, and that's what happened.
and, and
Against the surges that we've
vertical
had.
structures cause erosion at the toe.
Whoever put the wall, the concrete wall behind it, like to me, they drilled and poured concrete poles in there, you know, it looked like to me, it's holding up very well.
and the
but
whole
it's
idea-
undermined itself, and that's because of the wash going over and then washing back. But I would say that, the main failure was that the piles, the sheeting was not put in deep enough to support it. And I would almost bet that that's what it was.
Well, and the sheeting doesn't drain. So the stone, I mean, it's called Green Springs, right? And if you look on the survey, there are drop inlets all over that property. And I think a lot of the neighborhood drains onto that property. And whomever mentioned the seeps, there's a lot of water coming out of there, and you get the hydrostatic pressure building up on the backside of a wall that has no drain holes on it, and it's gonna fail. So taking out the vinyl wall, putting in stone, which will filter the water and allow it to drain into the river, plus you get a living shoreline out of the deal. So it's a forever solution.
I think you did a good design on that personally.
Thank you.
Is there any thought given to reworking the existing breakwaters to perhaps improve the effect?
We talked about raising them, we talked about making the gap smaller, because the gap's pretty big. For the James, it's a pretty big gap. And it was the first grouping, you know, of breakwaters. It did what they thought they were supposed to be doing, and you live and learn and modify accordingly.
Yeah, my concern is not for the sand or the nourishment that you're placing, which is within our jurisdiction. The breakwater clearly is not in our jurisdiction, but is making sure that it is a permanent solution for the applicant. And I'm not an expert in this, so I have familiarity with it, but not an expert. So I appreciate, again, you getting VIMs out, because that at least puts people that have an objective point of view to shed their light on it.
I don't get credit for that. I believe it was VMRC that requested it, so. I'm glad they got involved. And as you know, with breakwaters and nourishment, it's not always a done deal. You might need to go back and add more sand. I think this is gonna stop the upland erosion. It'll get the beach back. We're gonna plant it so it helps to stay stabilized, and hopefully it'll be a done deal.
Other questions? All right, thank you. Would the applicant like to come forward? Or would anyone else like to speak on this matter?
Mr. Chair, if I could real quick, just want to let members of the board know the information Ms. Havens just read has been uploaded into Novus for the record, so.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Mark Kaisend. We currently live at 3181 Derby Lane, the place that we're talking about here. We are in the process of moving there due to my father-in-law's health, and that's Glenn Horner. He's in the back here as well. I do have some pictures from 1998 and 2000, if you want to see them, what it originally looked like. It was a beautiful design. Everything was fine through 2005, 2006, 7. And then it just started going out when that other pier was built. It looks like it comes downriver and just gives it a big sweep back. So we've been watching that for years, thinking we got to do something. And I'm the contractor that muffed the wall, so I'll take responsibility for that. What we talked to was the Army Corps of Engineers, and we did that under an emergency services. We were concerned that that wall, once it broke, it wouldn't be able to be replaceable in the same condition. So they gave us permission to drive the piles in. And Mr. Waltrip, I think they were around 5.5 feet long. They were what was recommended by the company that we bought them from down in South Carolina. And I rented a Collins hammer out of New York and drove them down. And that was supposed to be there until we could get in front of you to do something more permanent. And it didn't quite last as long as it needed to get something more permanent there. What we're trying to propose here is something that will last a long time, the lifetime. I don't want to have to redo it again. And I can answer any questions that I'm able to, if you have any.
I'm just curious, you mentioned the period of time. So these weren't, in your family's experience, these weren't singular events. This is just a gradual loss of sand over time.
It started going out about 2003, 2004. And that's about the time that other pier had been built. And it is large. It protrudes out where most of them, the waves go underneath and go through the piers. This is a stone wall, like you would see to stop the waves, and it's stopping the waves, but it causes a big wash, and it takes all the sand that we've dumped over there, and the previous owner dumped over there, and that's what they keep dredging out of the James and taking up to Richmond, I guess.
Thank you.
I guess, just for clarification, I think what Mr. Rowley might be getting at is there's a long fetch to the northeast that comes straight down onto your property. And so after a storm event, like a nor'easter, do you see like a particularly, is a greater amount of erosion? You see the most damage being done after those events?
Sand keeps coming in. Most of the time you'll go down there and you'll see a fresh coating of sand like you do on the Sloan property downriver from us. And then if you walk every one of those beach fronts from ours down, they're beautiful. And then you get to that one and it's all being eroded out. So we keep seeing sand come in there, and then we do get a nor'easter that comes across the top of the jetties, and it just seems to wash everything back out. That's the reason we had talked originally with Carla and said, can we raise them up? We've had many different contractors out there, and quite a few of them said, let's raise up the jetties, let's close them in like Carla talked about. And they said, we don't think that'll stop it because we've got to stop the waves from coming in and battering that shoreline. If you look at the topography or the aerial view of that, that's right where that bend and then goes upriver. So that's the power that we've got to try to slow down so it doesn't continue to do what it's been doing.
All right. Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? You state your name and address, sir.
Samuel Taylor Powell, 3200 Derby Lane, the adjacent property owner. I think in your package you may have seen where I filed an objection to the proposed plan. Carla has revised it. We withdraw our objection to it. We prefer not to have any boat lift out there, but the way it's designed now is perfectly fine. The problem with the easement, that the property owners have an easement to come down to the beach, that's been resolved, so we have no objection to it. The other thing I wanted to bring to your attention was I have a map of this particular property that goes from two of them, one from 1670 and the other from 1770, that shows a ravine from my property coming down right where Timmy built the patio. So that's a long-standing ravine, and that doesn't have that much water coming down anymore. We've lived here 35, 36 years. We noticed the erosion only in the last couple of years, and I think it's directly responsible for that. The doctor who built his boat lift and whatever, you just see immediately it started to erode. I'll be back later to put some rock in to continue whatever Mr. Kaisan does. We'll carry it a little bit further because my erosion is about 2 or 3 feet deep, but it's on the river and no solution is permanent. Everything promises that it'll last, but in the end, the only thing that's really permanent are death and taxes. So we're happy.
Thank you for your comments.
Thanks. Is there anybody, please, sir?
I'm Steve Ruggles. There's 7 property owners, 3189 Derby Lane. There's 7 property owners that have access to the beach down there. And we were concerned about the erosion for sure, but we see no nourishment or anything. Where they're putting it is just right in the middle. So we're still concerned about an erosion problem. And the other thing, the revetment is such, it's rock, and so there would be no egress or ingress down to the beach. So we've put in an objection to that, and hopefully it can be resolved.
Thank you, sir. Yes, please.
Carla Havens, I have addressed all of the neighborhood concerns. I've exhausted my resources to address their concerns. When you were out there, perhaps you saw pink flags on wires. That delineated the beach access, which is basically 40 feet by 100 feet. It starts at mean low water, runs along the shared property line with Mr. Powell, and goes up to basically the front face of the bulkhead. So it's a little skewed, but it's basically 40 by 100. The easement walkway, if I remember correctly, is roughly 20 feet. Where's Mr. Kaisland? Roughly 20 feet from your shared property line. I put 2 more pink flags right there, so you can see, and without a surveyor going out, finding the pins and redoing everything. I mean, I did a pretty good job, and Mr. Powell helped me with it. We pulled from known reference points. So where those 2 stakes are is a 6-foot wide, it's left of what you're looking at right now. There is a 6-foot wide easement for the neighbors in the neighborhood. What we are going to do with the revetment, which is proposed on a 2-to-1 slope, is stair step it down. It's becoming a more and more popular thing to do. Instead of putting timber stairs over a revetment and having them wash out during a storm event, and you're left with piles because everything has lifted and gone to your neighbor's house, we are going to stair step the quarry stone so that access will be maintained. Right now, the access is behind the bulkhead. And I don't know who, if any, of the residents are using, you can't use it because it's 4 feet high. So we have addressed it. I have staked it. I emailed the Ruggles, I emailed the Ewells, and I emailed the Powells. Those were the people who were at the group powwow we had on site. And I've not heard back from anybody. As far as I know, the Ruggles have not withdrawn their objection, but better access will be provided for the neighborhood clearly than what is out there right now.
Okay, so the intent of your plan is to maintain access for the local community to
Yes.
that.
Yes,
to
it
that
is a
piece.
6-foot wide easement, and it will be worked into the 2-to-1 slope. Instead of just placing the stones, we'll use flatter stones to make stairs.
Okay.
So it will still act as a revetment, it will still serve as a revetment, but people will be able to step, walk down it like a set of steps. Because right now, they're either going around the edge there, a 3-foot drop, or they're clambering over the vinyl bulkhead that has no cap on it and tearing themselves up.
Okay.
And Mr. Kaisen has said, you know, he has welcomed the neighborhood to use his driveway. It's a much more hospitable way to get to the beach.
Thank you.
My name is Merle Powell. I live at 3200 Derby Lane. I'm married to this gentleman over here who made a little joke at the end. Just wanted to say my experience of living on the water there for 35 years. Someone asked about when does this washout occur. I'm a big observer, a photo taker. I go out in storms to take a picture of what's happening to the beach. And my experience before that pier with all of the rock underneath was that a high tide, especially coming upriver from the ocean, coming up to us, it had high water, but it left sand, it deposited sand. And our former washouts were when we had massive thunderstorms, and it would just pour down the hill. But since the construction of that pier, my neighbor on the other side, Mr. Sloan, he said, Merle, I think I have all your sand the last so many years, that it is just washing from that inlet where it has carved away. But I'm just an observation. This is just my observation, no science, but my observation over 35 years. It definitely changed when that pier was being built. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the community who'd like to speak on this? Okay, we will close the public hearing and board deliberations. I think it's obvious that this is badly needed to protect that, protect the patio, protect the uplands. This will just continue. You know, looking at these storm events, you know, if there's no sand getting deposited back down there, they're just gonna have to, you know, they're gonna have to put in that breakwater to hold.
I think that it's a bad needed fix. And it looks like to me that Carla has made arrangements for the walkway so the people in the neighborhood can get to the beach, and the way you're stepping it down is a great way of doing that. And I will support the project.
And I have a motion.
I'll make we're ready for a motion?
We are.
Are we? Ready? I'll make a motion to adapt resolution to grant the exception to Chesapeake Bay Board case WJPA 22-0009 at 213 South Point Drive. Am I on the right one?
Just to clarify, this is the Wetlands Board?
On the wrong one.
And it's 3181.
3181,
Derby
excuse
Lane.
me. 3181 Derby Lane, excuse me. It's, you want me to do it over again? Excuse me.
Yes, please.
All right. I make a motion to adopt a resolution to grant the exception to the Chesapeake Bay Board case WJPA 220010 at 3181 Derby Lane.
I'm sorry, sir, you said the Chesapeake Bay Board again.
Oh. You have to repeat and state that it's the Wetlands Board.
There's a typo.
Yeah, James City County Wetlands Board. They have the wrong resolution.
This is it right here.
Yeah, but it should say James.
I
City
said
County
adapt, James City County
Wetlands
Board. Okay, there's a Wetlands Board. Okay, make a motion to James City County Wetlands Board to adopt a resolution to grant exception Chesapeake Board case. And that would be the WJPA 22-0010 at 3181 Derby Lane.
Okay, so we have a motion to adopt Wetlands Board Case WJPA 22-0010. Mr. Roadley,
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes.
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Motion carries.
That concludes the public hearings. There are no considerations for the board, no matters of special privilege. Have a motion to adjourn?
Move.
Adjourn?
I'd like to call to order the James City County Chesapeake Bay Board meeting for Wednesday, June 8th, 2022. The responsibility of this board is to carry out locally the Commonwealth policy to protect against and minimize pollution and deposition of sediment in wetlands, streams, and lakes in James City County, which are tributaries of the Chesapeake Bay. Ms. Small, can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Roadley?
Here.
Mr. Waltrip?
Here.
Mr. Lukens?
Here.
Mr. Dunn?
Here.
Mr. Gussman?
Sure. First order of business are the minutes from the May 11th meeting. Are there any changes, additions, deletions from the minutes? The minutes stand as approved. Our next order of business is public hearings. The outline for tonight's public hearings will be a staff presentation followed by any questions or clarifications from the board. Then the public hearing will be opened. At that time, anybody wishing to speak may do so once called upon by the chair. All public speakers must state their name and address for the record. After everyone wishing to speak have done so, the public hearing will be closed and discussion among the board will start. Our first case is CBPA 22-0057, 729 East Taswell's Way.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Long, Watershed Planner, here to present CBPA-22-0057. Mr. Mark Adam of Blacktip Associates, LLC, has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Mr. Peter and Ms. Linda Brownell for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a deck located at 729 East Taswell's Way within the Kings Mill subdivision and the College Creek watershed. This property can be viewed on your screen. It's small, but it is outlined here in blue. Again, this is within the Kings Mill subdivision. A aerial photograph of the lot in question, the deck being constructed to the rear of the property, and the topography of this lot. This ravine here will come into play in this next slide, where you see the floodplain, but more importantly, the resource protection area. There is a perennial body of wetlands coming through here, causing the wetland or the resource protection area to encroach into the lot as heavily as it does. The total lot size of this property is 0.43 acres, of which 65% is located within the resource protection area. On May 31st, staff from the James City County Stormwater and Resource Protection Division made a site visit to the applicant's home and found the proposed 793 square foot deck was already constructed prior to the approval of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Waiver and a building permit. The existing deck includes 333 square feet of impacts to the landward 50-foot RPA and 460 square feet of impacts to the seaward 50-foot RPA. On the site plan above, you can see the seaward RPA line and the 100-foot resource protection area. And then the two areas of impact are broken up into slightly different colors. The brighter area of yellow is the deck encroachments into the landward 50-foot RPA and the deck encroachments into the seaward 50-foot RPA. Should this exception request be approved, required mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts shall be doubled, equating to 4 planting units, which is 4 canopy trees, 8 understory trees, and 12 shrubs. Additional requirements associated with the after-the-fact exception request approval would include the payment of a surety that would correspond to this amount of mitigation, an additional permit fee of $300, mimicking the normal after-the-fact process, and an additional civil charge payment of $4,500 be paid prior to the issuance of a building permit. On your screen and also in front of you is the civil charge determination matrix that the county uses in order to obtain the number that is in the staff report. Because this was constructed sometime in between the application of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Waiver and yet before its approval, the county deemed the degree of noncompliance to be in the major category. However, the water quality impact to be moderate based on violations that we have also experienced in the past. That is how we landed on this $4,500 for a civil charge. Some site photographs of this deck. As you can see, this is the looking backwards towards the sunroom area. Standing on the deck, looking towards the opposite side. The deck and stairs, and the gravel underneath this deck, which is would be a condition of this permit, which the applicant and contractor have already gone ahead and taken care of. And mitigation plantings that are already in place in some form or fashion. Over the past couple of years, it sounds like the homeowners have taken upon themselves to revegetate the resource protection area, and staff will take that into consideration in some form or fashion. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the construction of a deck. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the construction of a deck is considered accessory in nature. This exception request is also being heard by the board after the construction of this project. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied by Chapter 23, Chesapeake Bay Preservation of the James City County Code, to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 of the James City County Code and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. That the exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels. That reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be major for the proposed development. Staff recommends denial of this exception request and removal of the deck. However, if the board wishes to approve this request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into its approval. The applicants must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and/or local permits as required for the project, including a building permit. The submittal of a mitigation plan equating to 4 canopy trees, 8 understory trees, and 12 shrubs be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division prior to the issuance of a building permit. That a surety of $2,000 be submitted prior to the issuance of a building permit in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee the mitigation plantings. The placement of 3 inches of gravel over top filter fabric underneath the footprint of the deck, which the applicants have already done. And that a civil charge of $4,500 be paid prior to the issuance of a building permit. That this exception request shall become null and void if construction is not begun by June 8th, 2023, and with written requests for an extension to this exception be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than April 27th, 2023, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. The homeowner has also asked that we read into the record a timeline for the construction of this deck. According to this timeline, on May 10th, 2021, the homeowners moved from Vermont. On May 14th, they contracted with Black Tip Construction to build a deck equating to a payment of $73,278. And within that contract, the builder was to submit all plans to James City County and Kingsmill HOA for permits and approval. On June 9th, permit request submitted to Kingsmill Environmental Preservation Board. On August 17th, 2021, approval from the Kingsmill Environmental Board was granted. On September 24th, 2021, construction began. On December 27th, 2021, construction was completed. On January 25th, 2022, at the suggestion of a friend, they requested from Blacktip a copy of the JCC permit application, permit approval, and final inspection. And on February 1st, multiple communications with Blacktip for a status of permit were requested. The contractor can correct me if I'm wrong on this date. A building permit was submitted to the James City County building codes and officials in May of 2021. However, it was not put into review until April of 2022. I will say generally when this happens, the building safety and permits are awaiting information of some kind. And when I spoke with the folks on that side of the permitting division, that seemed to be what they remembered happening. So it was not put into workflow until 2022, while a building permit was applied for around the time that construction did occur. At the time that it did come into the county's workflow, stormwater and resource protection staff reviewed the building permit, and that's when we sent a letter requesting that a Chesapeake Bay Board hearing for an exception request be met. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Trevor, I got a little lost in the dates. Can you go through that one more time?
Certainly. In May of 2021, the homeowners moved to Williamsburg. On the 14th of May, they contracted with Blacktip Construction to build the deck. And then in June, a permit request was submitted to the Kingsmill Environmental Preservation Board.
The timeline that I'm looking at is when the permit application was submitted to the county.
Certainly. Likely around the exact same time that it was submitted to Kingsmill, a building permit was also submitted to the county. They oftentimes will keep things on hold if they are waiting on information or any further payments, things like that. And they won't put it into the review of people like Robin or myself until those things are taken off, those holds are taken off. So it evidently sat in hold from around June until April of this past year, so 2022.
This year.
Yes.
But regardless, they went ahead and built the deck without the authorization from the
Yes, sir.
Chesapeake Bay Board. Okay.
Was the builder instructed to build the deck, or did the homeowners instruct?
That I am not aware of.
Okay,
It looked like they were trying to jump through all the procedures of everything, but it looked like maybe that was it got laid aside, maybe. So either or.
okay, thank you, Trevor. At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. Will the applicant like to come forward and address the board?
I'm sorry,
Yes, so Mr.
Chairman. I just wanted to get a clarification on what was the total impacts?
Its total impacts were 793 square feet, 333 square feet of which were in the landward 50-foot RPA, and 460 were in the seaward 50-foot.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
at this time, I'll open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to come forward? Please state your name for the record and
Why don't I do this real quick first?
So I'm Peter Brownell, and this is my wife Linda Brownell, with 729 East Tazewells Way, and this is our house. We actually lived in Vermont for most of our adult lives and got tired of the cold. Decided we wanted to find our forever house, and we did a lot of research and decided on Virginia and Williamsburg, and we're really pleased to be here. But this is our forever home now. Sold our house in Vermont, and we are here. So the timeline, someone asked me it would be helpful to put the timeline together, and I'm the one that did put that timeline together. But when we first started, we were aware of the fact that there was a permit requirement for the Environmental Protection Board because the previous owner had some issues that had to be cleared up when we bought the house. So we knew there was the Environmental Board, but we had no idea that there was any, the Resource Protection Board was existed or whatever. We trusted the contractor to do whatever the permits needed. So we did not push him to do anything. We were trusting him to do whatever was necessary. So we made our final payments in January. We assumed everything was okay. We wrote him the final check, and it wasn't until afterwards that somebody suggested we should probably, if there was a permit there, we should probably just for our own benefit get a copy of the permit and application and the final inspection, and that's when we discovered that there was none. So we've been working for 4 months now, contacting them constantly, trying to say what's going on, what's happening, and we've been getting answers like, don't worry, we're working on it, we're handling it, but we certainly hope that you guys see it your way clearly to let us continue with this process. It's a beautiful place, and we love it being here. So the timeline was mine. Just so you, quick side note, the backyard is not actually very big. We're talking about putting some trees there. I think we have over 20 trees back there that are like this size. The whole backyard is virtually nothing but trees. And since we finished the construction, since the construction was finished of the deck, we've put in, I think, over 18 large plants, shrubs, and 100 ferns. There's a lot of the wetland area back there is covered with ferns, so we decided to help protect the washing. So we've done all that sort of stuff. We really are, Vermonters are typically like to say they're second to nobody in terms of environmental protection and concern. So we plan to be very good stewards of the area back there.
May I add to this? 729 Tazewells. Couple, 2, 3 things. We truly are tree huggers. We literally had the deck built around a huge tree. You can see from the photos. So that's number one. We really did our contract. Our contract actually stipulated that he was getting all of it. Sidebar, and I'm not doing this for sympathy. My haircut is not is as a result of the cancer treatments that I started, and therefore I was asleep for a lot of the construction, literally asleep, and I would wake up, and I was assuming that if an inspector that he came to sleep, because I would sleep from anywhere from 1 to 3 hours. And I was the project manager, my husband was the CEO. So so we apologize. I think that's the most to say, is that this is not how we do business. Circumstances. Sincerely apologize. Stated, it is a beautiful deck. One more thing, you still is a beautiful and consideration.
I just had one quick question about, you put in quotes, we'll submit all plans, James City County and Kings Mill HOA for permits and approval. That is written in the contract?
Absolutely, that's a quote from the contract, yes, sir.
Has that been submitted? Did you, Mr. Long?
I have a copy here, I can give it you. I've got a copy here, I don't have an extra copy yet, but I can let you make a copy.
Thanks.
Public hearing is still open. Who else would like to speak on this issue?
Mark Adam, 4816 Bluebill Run. Yes, this falls on me, and I'm not even gonna, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. I did apply for a permit, I was unaware that there was an RPA issue. The first moment I found out an RPA issue was there, I'm gonna immediately jump on it. This is not the way I wanna run my business. I want customers happy. We have been to the house several times to take care of any issues. I know there is one now. She contacted me last week, and I told her it will be taken care of this week. There's nothing I can say. I mean, I'm taking full responsibility. I've already been and filled out the paperwork for the fines that are going to be incurred. I'm going to do whatever I need to do because it's my responsibility to make it right. I did apply for the building permit last year. After months of waiting, we did wait. We waited for Kings Mill as well. And to keep my customer happy, and it's totally on me, I proceeded to build the deck. I'm not gonna deny one way or another. It is my fault. Lesson learned on the RPA on my side, because I'm not super familiar with it. But this is definitely enlightening. I apologize. I'm willing to take responsibility for anything and any actions that are required. And, my apologies to the Brownells as well. They've been great customers, and she went through a lot. Again, it is on me. It's my responsibility, and I will do whatever I need to do to make it right. Thank you.
I have a question. You have a contractor's license?
Yes,
Which license do you have?
we are Class A.
Okay, thank you.
I think you've probably done a lot of construction around this area, and you say you're not so familiar with building in the RPA or close to the RPA. But in general, when you submit a building permit or other types of permits, have you had other experiences where you haven't gotten responses back from the county?
Oh, several.
And in this case, wouldn't you make phone calls or knock on a door or something
And we
like that?
we do, but I was totally unaware of an RPA, honestly, until April, or Robin called me. I mean, I had no idea. I really didn't. If I did, I would have handled it differently right from the beginning. But I didn't, and now I'm actually getting ready to get involved in a second RPA for a house that we're looking to build. So, I had a meeting with Trevor and Robin the other day. Good explanations for me. It was a good learning thing for me. But, as I said, I take full responsibility, and whatever actions need to be taken care of, I am willing to do.
Was the building permit issued for this deck?
Still not. I have spoken to Tom Coghill. Tom and I conversed through email last week. He's asked me to resubmit everything. I'm in the process of resubmitting everything for him. And then we'll have new inspections done on the footprints and the plans.
Has there been any inspection?
I don't believe there's been one at all. The deck is built way beyond regular James City County codes. I submitted their deck application a year ago. I have a copy of it here. We build these decks 2x10s, 12 inches on center, composite. We're not doing 2016 centers or anything like that. It's a very well-constructed deck. We had another company come in, dig the footings, so they're full-size footings. Everything is built beyond compliance. And as I said, I will do whatever I have to do to make it right.
It's commendable that you take full responsibility, and that's refreshing to hear. So I'm looking at the survey that was done. Who did this? Who did the survey?
I had Cardinal Survey go out there because when the initial was brought up to me about the RPA, I had to find out. And so I called Cardinal Survey, go out and do a full survey with the deck included.
That was,
Back, well, it took them a long time to do it, but we did, I can't remember the dates that I had them go out there.
it says here in April of 21, you guys did a field survey there.
That would have been right after I received my first phone call from Robin.
In April of 21? 2021?
This year, we did the survey this year.
Okay. How long have you worked in Williamsburg?
I've worked here a long time, but the company that we're working now is this, you know, I've always been the project managers or superintendents. So this side of the construction, I mean, I understand it, but as far as RPA, this is really one of the first times I've had to visit the board, obviously.
But yeah, there's definitely a learning curve. If you keep working in James City County, I mean, this whole place is basically.
Yeah, no, and I understand that as lots are dwindling and we're finding them. I had a conversation with a customer today and pulled up the map that I was shown again yesterday and said, there's a lot of RPA on this lot, so. But had I known there was RPA, I honestly did not know, or else I would have addressed it differently.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak on this issue? At this time, I'll close the public hearing. Is there any discussion from the board?
Mr. Chairman, I just have a comment. It was stated in the staff presentation that the civil charge could be a condition if the board is so inclined to approve the application, but that should not be, it is my advice, that should not be a condition, and that the discussion should be limited to the elements to approve or deny the exception.
So we should not be discussing the civil charge, is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
So how would the civil charge be resolved if there was one?
The civil charge is a separate process that is when you have an alleged violator of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance, they basically come to a settlement agreement with staff of the county. So they come to an agreement to avoid litigation, and then that is something that is confirmed by the Board of Supervisors, which would be a public hearing before the Board of Supervisors. And that would be an up or down vote of the Board of Supervisors whether or not to approve the civil charge, which is essentially a consent order.
Okay, so, but that discussion's already taken place, correct?
That discussion is happening between staff and between the contractor, yes. Separately.
Is the contractor responsible or the homeowner?
The contractor.
Yes, in this case, the civil charge was discussed between Mr. Adam and myself. We went ahead and were discussing that civil charge yesterday and came to an agreement of it, so that when it goes to the, if it were to be approved and go to the Board of Supervisors, it can be brought to the closest meeting date.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, let's see, I closed the public hearing. Is there any discussion from the board? Any other comments, questions?
The continuing of contractors, building without permits is, this is just an ongoing issue that we continue to face. It's commendable to have one come in and accept full responsibility. But in this case, I mean, it's a clear violation. There were no permits issued.
Seems after the fact that there would be more degradation of the property if the deck is removed. Mitigation.
Before we vote on this, I'd like to request the staff that, I mean, this is very unfortunate. We're all human, there can be mistakes, but this happened, there's no getting around it. I'd like to request the staff to draft a letter to the licensing board for contractors, at least outlining this case, so it goes on record, what happened here. Staff do that? Just outlining the facts of the case, what happened.
I don't think that would be a proper request of this board to take action on, but staff is obviously listening.
Okay. Yes, okay, can we have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, if I can make a comment before the motion, I appreciate the predicament that the Brownells are in, and I also appreciate the revegetation that has occurred in the rear of your property adjacent to the deck. I would just ask and encourage that you continue with that revegetation in that area, you know, whether it's shrubs or understory trees, but try to get that so you get full revegetation back there as a buffer. Thank you.
Okay, how about a motion now?
All right, Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to adopt the resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA Tech 22 Tech 0057 at 729 East Tazewell Way.
Roll call?
Motion to adopt. Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes, motion carries, exception has been granted. Thank you for coming out. We wish you a speedy recovery in your health. Our next case is CBPA 22-0066, 4756 Bristol Circle.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Robin Benedict, Watershed Planner. This is CBPA 22-0066. Mr. Michael Mann has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a retaining wall located at 4756 Bristol Circle within the West Ray Downs subdivision and the Mill Creek watershed. You can sort of see the parcel in blue underneath this arrow and the Mill Creek watershed outlined in yellow. Here is aerial photography of the site, the project location at the front of the existing house, topography at the site. The total lot size of this property is 0.48 acres, of which 98% is located within the RPA, so all but a sliver here at the front of the property is RPA. The applicant is proposing to construct a retaining wall at the front of the house to help control erosion on the property. Total impacts to the RPA associated with this proposal equate to 52 square feet of impacts to the landward 50-foot RPA. Required mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts equals 3 shrubs. Here is the proposed site plan showing the existing walkway in front of the house and the proposed retaining wall. To put it in better perspective, here is that GIS overlay with the 50-foot resource protection area going right into the front of the house. The proposed retaining wall just in front of that, and then the 100-foot resource protection area at the front of the house. Existing site photographs. In front of the walkway, currently there are a couple bricks, but that is the basic footprint of the proposed retaining wall. And it loops back around towards the stairs at the front of the house. And it will continue down towards the driveway. This little knoll at the edge of the driveway, it will be straightened out and then curved back, so they'll lose this little bit of land. They say it's a little bit of a safety hazard as it currently stands against that walkway. And here's the current condition of their front yard. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the construction of a retaining wall. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the construction of a retaining wall is considered accessory in nature. The board may grant exceptions to Section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicant any special privileges denied by Chapter 23, Chesapeake Bay Preservation of the James City County Code to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 of the James City County Code and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels, and reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be minor for the proposed development. Staff recommends approval for this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve this request, staff recommends that the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. The submittal of a mitigation plan equating to 3 shrubs be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division prior to project start, and a surety of $250 be submitted in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee the mitigation plantings. This exception request approval shall become null and void if construction has not begun by June 8th, 2023, with a written request for an extension to the exception submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than April 27th, 2023, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this time.
There does not appear to be any questions from the board. At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to come forward and address the board? Anyone else like to address the board?
My name is Elizabeth Rutherford Bowling. I am adjacent property owner at 4676 Hickory Signpost Road. I've lived in on the swamp area there for 65 years. My only issue here is granting them permission.
Excuse me, sorry, Mr. Chair, members of the board, I'm sorry, this is in regards to the case at Bristol Circle. Are you speaking in regards to Bristol Circle, or are you on the next case for Hickory Signpost?
This is Bristol Circle. This is for Gary and Elizabeth Bowling. I also have another case on the same Mill Creek. Why I am objecting to this one, because I feel that down the road, as I was told the last time, well, we did it this time. So that's why I'm here. I don't want this swamp to be, it's already endangered because of runoff and people that keep building on the Mill Creek area. And this swamp area that I've lived all my life is getting more fragile. I see more light coming through the swamp. I see more vegetation that's not natural to the swamp area. I see wildlife, they live in my yard. They don't stay in the swamp anymore, from snakes, turtles, whatever. And I also have people coming through the swamp. And I just hope you consider it that we need to protect it and stay strong and say, if I let you do it, then I got to let the person down the road do it, and so forth.
You may want to see, we're voting now only on Bristol Circle. You may want to repeat your remarks when we open up that case, okay?
All right, this is Bristol Circle.
Oh, yeah, this one is Bristol Circle, but I think
it's a retaining wall.
Mr. Chairman, I think she's making a larger point in general about approvals within the RPA.
Oh, okay. All right.
Because I have another one on the same adjacent, so.
Okay, all right.
But that's my my feelings on the swamp area.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
But thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak on the Bristol Circle case?
I'm Michael Mann. I live at 4756 Bristol Circle. I wasn't going to, but to address your comments, this small wall is in the front of the property, and it's to help prevent any further erosion as we go through and replant the front yard and put shrubs in. So I'm not really sure how that would affect, or what the effect would be exactly on the protected area behind the house. We do go to great lengths and trouble to make sure that everything stays natural back there. And that, for example, when the yard is raked and leaves are taken away, it's done by hand and they're taken away. They're not thrown into the woods or anything of that nature. So.
Okay, thank you. Would anyone else like to speak on this issue? At this time, we'll close the public comment period, the public hearings. Any discussion from the board?
Mr. Chairman, I think a fairly minor encroachment in this instance. I'm inclined to support the staff recommendation.
I would say I'd like to basically compliment the owner in this case for going through the bureaucracy to accomplish a really small setup like this rather than having a midnight mortar party or something like that. But I understand your points in terms of protection of the RPA. That's why we're here. And given the existence of property at this, we have to look at whether it's better to add this bulkhead as it is, curtail future erosion, or let it continue as it is. So we're definitely all in sympathy with protection of the resource. Try to do our best to.
Can I have a motion?
I move to adopt a resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case number CBPA-22-0066 at 4756 Circle.
Ms. Small, can we have a roll call?
Motion to adopt, Mr. Roadley,
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip,
Yes.
Mr. Lukens,
Yes.
Mr. Dunn,
Yes.
Mr. Gussman.
Yes, motion carries. The exception is granted. Thank you for coming out tonight. Our next case is CBPA 22-0060, 4816 Hickory Signpost Road.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Trevor Long, Watershed Planner, here to present CBPA 22-0060. Mr. Chase Grogg of Landtech Resources Incorporated has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Mr. and Miss Sony Marcano for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a single-family dwelling located at 4816 Hickory Signpost Road within the Mill Creek Watershed. You can see this property outlined here in blue. Again, the watershed boundary is here in yellow, and that is the Mill Creek Watershed. This parcel was platted in 1970 prior to the adoption of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 1990. An aerial photograph of this property is outlined here in blue. The road runs, it curves around this property. So this property is the bend in Hickory Signpost with the wetlands running through and around this property as well. The topography as this area is situated, very, very steep, dropping off to the actual wetlands. The wetlands themselves are very flat, very characteristic of streams with floodplain adjacent wetlands on them. And it's because of these wetlands that the resource protection area sits as it does on this lot. The total lot size of this property is 0.56 acres, of which 100% is located within the RPA. The applicants are proposing to construct a new 548 square foot single family dwelling with a 140 square foot deck and a 109 square foot patio. Additionally, there is a 942 square foot driveway associated with the construction to accommodate for the lack of street parking on this road, and 2 concrete walkways which equate to a total of 117 square feet of impacts. Therefore, total impacts to the RPA associated with this proposal equate to 85 square feet of impacts to the landward 50-foot RPA and 1,959 square feet of impacts to the seaward 50-foot RPA. Slightly less numbers, a total of 1,959 square feet of impacts to the resource protection area in total. The applicants gained approval from the Board of Zoning Appeals in May 2022 to move the building setback from 60 feet from the road to 30 feet in an effort to move the dwelling farther from the wetlands. If this approval from the Board of Zoning Appeals had not occurred, the house itself would be more than likely being constructed within the wetlands. On the site plan above, you can see these wetlands outlined here in green. The limits of clearing are this dash lined here. The 50-foot resource protection area here in red, and the 100 further out into the road. Seaward 50-foot house encroachments are outlined here in orange, and the accessory structures outlined here in the darker brown. The proposed driveway encroachments that occur into the seaward 50-foot, like I said, there are 2 walkways that are coupled in with this number. And in yellow, you see the area that is outside or within the landward 50-foot RPA. So the majority of this lot is within the seaward 50-foot RPA, making pulling it out very, very difficult. I did also include, or the applicant has also included 2 infiltration BMPs to capture water quality and treat the runoff. As I was saying before, this is the new 30-foot setback that is on this lot. The contractor also requested that we show this diagram regarding the size of the driveway. It is a large driveway, and there is no street parking due to the size of the road on Hickory signposts. This is a diagram showing reasons why the driveway needs to be the size it is, in the words of the contractor, and a house diagram from the contractor as well. Required mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts equates to 5 planting units, which is 5 canopy trees, 10 understory trees, and 15 shrubs. Again, the applicant has verbally agreed to this and also proposed 2 additional infiltration BMPs on site. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the construction of a single-family dwelling. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the construction of a single-family dwelling extends. This construction of a single-family dwelling extends into the seaward 50-foot RPA. Some photographs from the site. In this photo, you can see more what could be taken as understory. That is the drop-off in topography that you saw on the earlier photographs, and that is also the wetlands. Some of these blue flags indicate staking, corners, things of that nature. This is the resource. This is the toe of slope where you see the changing color of leaves That is the delineated wetlands, and there is also a perennial stream running through the site as well. Here you can see the road. So this is the buildable area of this lot. It is the one null that's outside of the wetlands and where the applicants are proposing to construct the single-family dwelling. Here is an orange flag, I believe, or these two are orange flags. I believe these are corners of the proposed dwelling. So that is the approximate width of the house. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied by Chapter 23, Chesapeake Bay Preservation of the James City County Code to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 of the James City County Code and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels. Reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and exception requests and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be major based on the impacts to the seaward 50-foot RPA. Staff recommends approval for this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve the request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into its approval. The applicant must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. The submittal of a mitigation plan equating to 5 planting units, which is 5 canopy trees, 10 understory trees, and 15 shrubs, be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later or prior to the issuance of a building permit. That a surety of $2,500 be submitted in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee these mitigation plantings. That an affidavit be recorded to the Williamsburg-James City County Courthouse prior to the issuance of this building permit. And that this exception request approval shall become null and void if construction has not begun by June 8th, 2023, and that written request for an extension to an exception shall be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than April 27th, 2023, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date of this permit. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Did you show the area that they were going to be clearing again
Yes, yes, sir.
on that one?
So this is, while this is not the entire parcel, this is the area in question of being built. So the clearing limits follow this jagged line here. It's what will be the existing tree line should this permit get approved.
I may add, we have copies of the plat, a full-size copy.
Yes, sir.
of the plat,
This is,
if you need to
true.
refer to that.
Trevor, I understand this lot was platted over 50 years ago. Would this lot be platted this way if it came before the county today?
No, sir. Generally, when lots or subdivisions are coming in for review at the building, for building, we would not allow a lot to be platted that would not have buildable area outside of the resource protection area.
In fact, this lot was platted before the Clean Water Act.
Yes, sir.
Within the area to be cleared, there are at least 2 canopy trees, is that right? And maybe a third, I don't quite recall. But
Yes, there are multiple canopy trees within that area.
so the mitigation units in this case they're not necessarily be plantings on the site, but
We'll defer to the contractor on exactly where the plantings go. However, based on my conversations with the contractor, we would be requiring the plantings to go back in some of these cleared areas in some form or fashion. We can substitute out things like canopy trees for understories for shrubs, to allow, the proper growth of each site. I would say in this scenario, it's unlikely that 5 canopy trees are going to fit and also thrive in that environment. Therefore, we would probably be working with the contractor to substitute many of these.
Any other questions for the staff? At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to come forward and address the board?
Good evening, members of the board. Chase Grogg with Land Tech Resources, 205 Bullifonts Boulevard, Suite E, Williamsburg, Virginia.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch your last name.
Grogg, G-R-O-G-G. So yes, I guess one of the things I want to start off with first is, really the hardest thing to really put your mind to with this lot is the scale of the house. It's the smallest house I've ever done a plot plan with, either in a non-RPA lot or an RPA lot. So when this was actually the house they brought to me, I was pleasantly surprised that I wasn't trying to fit something bigger, on the lot. So, with only being 560 square feet, it makes everything else on the lot look really, really big when in proportion. It's really not that much more than any other lot we deal with. I know that when we originally submitted this plan, when it went to the BZA, as well as when it was originally submitted to the county for this case, the deck had an additional 2 feet on the back of it, as well as we showed a spa off the side of the patio. We were trying to just kind of show everything that could potentially go there, but in trying to address some of the concerns early on, those 2 changes have been made to the plan. I know there's been some discussion about the size of the driveway. When I went to go and look at downsizing that, because I thought I had kind of made it to spec to start with, in a standard driving situation, your drive aisle is 24 feet. The drive aisle on this plan is only 17 feet. And then same thing with the parking space. Standard parking space is 18 feet deep. The parking space here is 13 feet deep. That's why we ran kind of a car analysis pulling in there, because as some of the neighbors will, point out was a concern during the BZA meeting, there's no street parking. You got to turn off the street. You got to get on the lot. And so that's why the entrance is the way it is. That's why we have 3 parking spaces. That's why it's a full drive aisle. So unlike another lot on a straight street with a slower speed limit where you could pull in and back out into the street safely, you really need to be able to maneuver on the lot here, get off Hickory Signpost Road, maneuver on the lot, and be able to get back out onto Hickory Signpost Road without really impeding traffic on the road there. The other thing I'd like to point out, kind of late in the day today, I got revised house plans, which kind of show can you go back to the house plans? The house plans you guys saw kind of show an A shape all the way down, and the final house plans kind of show an 8-foot wall coming up to a smaller roof and back up to the A. I have a copy of, since we've been handing out paper today, it's kind of small, but basically where the 2 entrances are on the front and the back, that style roof is going to extend the length of the house. I know there's some concerns with the slope on the back of the house, so we can put gutters. Originally that wasn't really going to be an option, but we can run gutters along the entire length of the back of the house and direct that water over to kind of the bottom of the page or the southern side, so that you don't have all of this roof water runoff going right down, the slope there. The slope can get stabilized, and the water that, is draining there today can get rerouted to the side. Mr. Lukens, to address kind of your question, we don't have a specific site-specific mitigation plan at the moment, but the entire lot is, normally we're kind of fighting for finding plantings within the RPA, but since the entire lot is within it, we'll be able to do, yes, 5 canopy trees will not happen on site, but a combination of a canopy tree or 2, some understories and shrubs can be, planted around to help mitigate. And I'm sure with a handful of stuff going on the slope on the backside there, since that, will need to be restabilized, once it is cleared. I think that kind of sums up everything I have. Happy to answer any questions you guys have.
Can you describe the construction of the trenches there and
Yeah, so there, to Mr. Gussman's point, if you, I guess since you have a printout of it, if you want to flip out to the other side, there's actually a detail of those infiltration trenches. They're basically stone trenches that the water gets routed to. They have catch basins in the top of them, depending on how big they are, depends on how many catch basins are placed in the infiltration trenches. Water can go in through the surface as well as goes in through the catch basins into the stone and then into the ground. And infiltrates into the ground. So the whole front half of the house is being directed there, and then the entire driveway is being directed to one along the driveway. So with now being able to also route the water off the back of the house over to the side, we're, a majority of water that's going over that slope right now is going to be directed elsewhere and away, as well as treated.
So I'm wondering about the actual outflow of the trenches.
The trenches do not get any outflow pipe. Those are designed that they just infiltrate.
So it's all infiltration.
And then if they get tasked, they'll just sheet flow over the top of them.
Grog, did you look at the soils on the lot?
We looked at the soil study based on, it's a sandy soil, so we did not do any site-specific infiltration testing.
Well, I looked on the soil map, and it lists most of the lot as being in Johnston Class D hydric soil.
Okay.
I was curious because I thought infiltration might be an option, but I'm concerned that infiltration may not be an option with Class D soils. So.
Any other questions? Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak on this issue?
Hello. My name is Babs Bengtson, that's Bengtson, and I'm in the adjacent lot of 4824 Hickory Signpost Road. Could I show pictures?
Any pictures, you give us, we have to keep, it becomes part of the record. Is that okay?
Yeah, I just need my thumb drive back.
Okay.
Yes, that'd be fine.
You have to keep part of, it becomes part of the legal record, so, but we
I
can give you the
understand.
thumb drive back. You'll have to wait a minute, but you're welcome to come back and make comments on this case.
Yeah, the file, it says Hickory Signpost Wetlands. That one. Okay, thank you. So I just wanted to show the board what it looks like when it rains. Could we? Oh, great. Thank you. So this is a picture of the lot looking from the road. I didn't know we were going to have pictures already as part of the thing. This is my first hearing. I just wanted to show you the beauty of the place that is going to be destroyed by a house. This is another part of the lot that is absolutely gorgeous, and it just breaks my heart to think that this is going to be built space. This is in the back after a regular rain. This is after a heavier rain. This is the back of the lot. And you can see that this is starting to get a little bit more flooding after a heavy rain. And this is what it looks like when we have like a really heavy rain overnight in a whole day and a whole night worth of rain. And I'm sure you guys are very familiar with wetlands, but I'm just saying this is what wetlands do. And I think we learned after Hurricane Katrina how important it is to not overbuild wetlands with built spaces, that we need to protect these wetlands so that they can do the job that they're doing. And here's just more flooding. Okay, so this is Abby Kadabi because I was making a book for my granddaughter. The thing that I wanted to show in this picture is the waterfall behind. This is the little area that is right down the bank from the bridge that is adjacent to the property. And this is what it looks like in the flood after it's been raining. You can see that the waterfall, which is so prominent before, is totally obliterated. You can't even see it. And this is the other side of the bridge. This is looking down the bridge on the one side. You can see that pole there. This is after a rain. This isn't after a regular day. When it doesn't rain, you can see the gravel underneath the pile there. And this is what it looks like after a heavy rain. And I'm done. But again, I just wanted to point out why it is so important to preserve this wetlands, that there is a lot of water that happens in this area. And I'm very concerned that if we have built areas, that's going to, it's going to take away from the wetlands being able to do their job. The other thing I would like to say is that what I understand is there was additional legislation that was passed in 2018 about trying to regain even more wetlands area. In 1970, the maps at that time clearly showed that this was wetlands area. It should have never, ever been zoned as residential. So a mistake was made 52 years ago. I can't believe that we can't undo a mistake that was done 52 years ago. I mean, why are we living with this mistake and saying, yeah, it's okay to build because somebody didn't pay attention to a map that clearly, and that map is part of the board hearing that was already mentioned, the setback ordinance hearing. So that is already part of public record that it should have been designated as wetlands. So the 2018 legislation saying that they needed to recapture more wetlands, this is 0.5 acres of wetlands that we could attribute towards that goal of having and reclaiming more wetlands. So I don't know what you guys can legally do, because I know that it was platted or whatever the word is prior to the Chesapeake Bay Act. But if there's anything that you guys could do to deny this build, I would really appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Did you say you're the house next door?
Yes. And I just want you to notice that the pictures I took were over a lot of different time. I've been fascinated by the wetlands ever since I've lived there. I mean, it's a really cool place, and I would just hate to see it be destroyed by a building.
I have a question, since you've lived there for a while, I assume. When it rains, is there a lot of water coming down the street? Is the water going over this property?
Yes, the water comes down the street. My driveway is often in water. I have a gravel driveway.
So the water coming off the street's also flowing across this property?
Yes, and it flows across my driveway as well.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, just for clarity, as I recall, when we visited the site, we stepped up off of the road surface to get onto the lot. Did you by chance get a chance?
There's a ditch.
Just to make sure we're clear on the record on water flowing.
Okay.
If you put a driveway there, well, I guess if it's a gravel driveway, it could work. But
Does it flow across the high part of the property or around the property on the lower end?
Well, during the hurricanes, which are an anomaly, right? My backyard gets flooded, and my front yard is obviously flooded. During regular heavy rains, my front yard is more flooded than the back.
Elevation of your piece of property equal to this?
Equal. It's pretty much straight across.
Thank you.
Thank you. And again, legally, if there's anything you can do to deny, thank you.
Would someone else like to address the board on this issue? Okay, state your name and address for the record, please.
Hi, Gary Bowling and Elizabeth Bowling, 4676 Hickory Signpost Road. I understand this piece of property was platted long before building permits were required, or any of the boards existed, or wetlands were prized, but I can't believe that the people trying to get this exception did not know that this was an unbuildable lot when they bought it, and trying to come and get exceptions based on a pre-existing lot. This is, I've worked for 20 years. I was an owner of Guernsey Tingle Architects, and I have dealt with the RPA and the boards and so forth, and never have I seen the board allow the construction of an entire house and a parking area that is almost as big as the house to be within the seaward 50-foot RPA. That blows my mind, that it's even being considered. And I don't care if it's a pre-existing lot. This cypress swamp that we live on, it's a very delicate thing, and not too many people have mentioned in this case it is a huge contributor to the Mill Creek watershed, and that is a very protected source. If it's granted, you're going to have more silt, and also there's a lot of fill that's being put. When I saw the lines on the new contours, which means, to me, it means it's fill. You're adding fill dirt to this, and the shape of the roof is just not conducive to runoff. It's going to increase the velocity of the runoff down that hill, and I don't know what can be done to stop any of that runoff during construction to create mud and silt in that swamp. To go on further, it is a very dangerous curve right there. It goes to a one-lane bridge. Traffic backs up in front of this house. We've seen it. We've seen buses coming down there that the mapping things send the buses the wrong way.
About tour buses,
Major
not
tour
school buses.
So it can be congested down there. But yeah, the main concern of ours is completely being able to build a house in the 50-foot seaward side of the RPA. So we stand opposed to this whole project.
Well, this here won't die, because you're gonna open up the light, the light. On the last meeting, they said, well, it would improve our sight vision crossing the bridge. I said, no, because you have a house there. It's still gonna be blocked. And and the erosion, when you take these trees away, they're large beechwood trees, and the root base on those are phenomenal. And just disturbing that ground alone, I just see a lot of erosion lately anyway in the area, and it just breaks my heart to see this house just show up.
I understand the Board of Zoning Appeals recently approved this based on the hardship of the fact that this lot was platted prior to the zoning ordinance's adoption. But I plead with you to not let that single fact be the only thing that allows this exception to happen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak on this issue? Okay, at this time, I'll close the public hearing and open it up for board discussion.
Mr. Chairman, the previous speaker referenced portions of the lot as being wetlands that I think we're considering uplands. I'd just like some clarity from staff on, was the wetland line established by a wetland scientist, or is?
Yes, sir. The wetland line shown on this site plan was delineated by Mr. Matt Roth. His signature is here. So this green area is the established and approved wetland line.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the board members?
Mr. Chairman, this is a tough case, and I recognize that the lot was platted before the act, before the Clean Water Act. Back in 1970, they could have built a house on this lot out in the middle of the swamp if they wanted to, and they wouldn't have needed a permit. But it's not 1970, and the amount of encroachment into the RPA, I think, is significant. And it is my opinion that this exception request is not in harmony with the purpose and intent of this chapter and poses a substantial detriment to water quality. Therefore, I will not be supporting the application.
I concur with Mr. Rodley's assessment. Even though it was plotted before the act, the soil type not really allowing for good infiltration. The distance from the construction to the wetlands is so small that I find it difficult to believe that at some point that it's not going to impact the quality of the wetlands. I think this lot is unbuildable. I don't know how they could.
I think that the mitigation cannot be done on this property that would mitigate the impact here, and really feel that the purchase of mitigation units to be applied elsewhere would not be equivalent to the environmental impact.
Okay. I think I concur with the comments of my fellow board members. I also want to add, I don't think the exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. That driveway is way too big. And I think this project would definitely cause a degradation of water quality. I have some real doubts about the infiltration trenches. I don't think they're going to work. They're way too close to the wetlands, and the soil types are wrong. So I see a lot of problems with this. I could not support this project either.
Mr. Chair, we've received some information that the applicant would like to defer. That is something that is that they are asking for. You can allow them to defer, or you can not allow them to defer and then act on it. That is up to you all.
Okay. Do we have to vote on it? Well, my recommendation is I would like the board to deny the project tonight and not to defer it. I don't see what's going to change that's going to allow me to vote for this.
You're still in board, excuse me, still in board consideration. So if you have a motion to deny the request for deferral, that should come before the action on the underlying application. And if you do want to allow the deferral, you should open back up the public hearing and then move on to the next item. But I'm just telling you the paths, potential.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to deny the request for deferral for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA-22-0060.
Okay, so we have a motion to deny the deferral. So that's what we're voting on first. Okay.
Mr.
Can we have a
Rodley?
roll call?
Sorry, Mr. Rodley?
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip?
No.
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes. Okay. So that settles the issue of deferring the case.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Can we have a motion to deny the exception request?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to deny the resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA Tech 22 Tech 0060 at 4816 Hickory Signpost Road.
Okay, so we have a motion to
Mr.
deny.
Chairman, I'm sorry, one more comment. As written, I think it probably should be a motion to deny the application to grant the exception rather than the specific resolution that we have here, because it would be a resolution denying the application if you choose to do so.
So to deny the application?
Yes.
For the resolution?
The application for the exception.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to deny the application to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case CBPA Tech 22 Tech 0060 at 4816 Hickory Signpost Road.
Okay, we have a motion to deny the application. Can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes, okay, the application is denied. Thank you for coming out. We have two more cases. I would like to call a 5-minute recess. Be back in 5 minutes. I'm calling the meeting to order again. Moving along, our next case is CBPA-22-0063, 112 North Nob Hill. Ms. Benedict?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Robin Benedict, Watershed Planner. This is CBPA 22-0063. Mr. Chase Grogg with Atlantic Resources has applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception on behalf of Mr. Matthew and Miss Shelley Triola for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a new single-family dwelling located at 112 North Nob Hill within the Ford's Colony subdivision in the Powhatan Creek Watershed. You can see the parcel outlined in blue and the Powhatan Creek Watershed outlined in yellow. Can you all hear me okay over the rain?
Yeah.
Okay. The parcel was platted in 2005 after the changes to the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Ordinance in 2004. The total lot size of this property is 1.01 acres, of which 93% is located within the RPA. Here's aerial photography of the project location, the topography as it affects this lot, sanitary sewer line shown in yellow across the back of the lot, the RPA shown in purple. The applicants are proposing to construct a new single-family dwelling with a deck and patio. Total impacts to the RPA associated with this proposal equate to 2,552 square feet of impacts to the landward 50-foot RPA and 3,496 square feet of impacts to the seaward 50-foot RPA, for a total of 6,048 square feet of impacts. Required mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts equals 16 planting units, or 16 canopy trees, 32 understory trees, and 48 shrubs. The applicants have proposed to plant 8 planting units, or 8 canopy trees, 16 understory trees, and 24 shrubs, and pay the remaining 8 credits in the amount of $4,000 into the Chesapeake Bay Mitigation Fund. Here's a proposed site plan. You also have a paper copy in front of you. Here's the edge of wetlands, so 2 wetland systems exist on this property. The 50-foot resource protection area and the 100-foot resource protection area shown in red. The area of the house within the seaward 50-foot RPA shown in orange. And the area of the house and the landward 50-foot RPA shown in this lighter yellow shade. The area of the driveway within the seaward 50-foot RPA, again in that orange color, and the rest of the driveway in the 50-foot landward RPA. There are also 2 proposed infiltration BMP trenches on this property as well, one to the side of the driveway and one towards the back of the house. Here is the proposed mitigation plan for this project. Site photography looking back towards what will be the corner of the house. Again, an overview of the entire lot. Looking back towards the road this time at the front of the house shown by this stake. At the back left corner of the house. Here is the edge of the wetlands, which can be shown by this flagging. And again, an overview of the entire property looking out towards the street. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the construction of a new single-family dwelling. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the construction of this single-family dwelling extends into the seaward 50-foot RPA. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied by Chapter 23, Chesapeake Bay Preservation of the James City County Code to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 of the James City County Code and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels, and reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be major for the proposed development. Staff recommends approval for this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve the request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicants must obtain all of the necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. The submittal of a mitigation plan equating to 8 planting units be submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division prior to project start. A surety of $4,000 be submitted in a form acceptable to the James City County Attorney's Office to guarantee the mitigation plantings. A payment of $4,000 into the Chesapeake Bay Mitigation Fund prior to the issuance of a building permit. And then an affidavit be recorded in the Williamsburg, James City County Courthouse prior to the issuance of the building permit. This exception request approval shall become null and void if construction has not begun by June 8th, 2023, with written requests for an extension to this exception submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than April 27th, 2023, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this time.
I have a couple questions. On the plat you gave us, the heavy dashed line, those are all the wetlands. Could you just trace that out? Trace that out with the pointer. So I want to make sure I really understand that.
So there's one set of wetlands here at the top, shown in green, and then another down in this bottom corner going up and around.
So how far that lower wetlands? How far is that from the house property? What's the distance in the? What's that distance in there? Between the edge of the house and the edge of the wetlands.
I don't have the scale shown on this picture, but I'll defer that to the contractor, and he may be able to give a rough estimate.
Thank you. Any other questions for the staff?
These wetlands, what hydrologic source are they associated with?
Mr. Long, do you have an answer?
Mr. Grog was trying to find documentation on that. So if he was able to find that documentation, I'll allow him to speak to that, but I am.
There's a BMP just off to, if you were looking at this image, just off to the right of this image, is that correct?
I believe so. Yes, there is indeed a BMP adjacent and behind this lot.
So that water body that's a water body on the right, but that's considered a BMP.
Yes, sir. And then actually on the lot there are connecting contiguous wetlands that feed into that BMP, pushing the resource upwards.
Go back to the plat. So refresh my memories, the sewer easement, I see a variable width utility drainage for the pond, and then you've got the dashed line, which I think is the path of the sewer. Is that correct? Looks to be about an inch wide, going north to south.
Yes, that would be the sewer line.
And it takes a jog and goes to the left,
Yes.
heavily constraining the lot.
Yes, sir. I know there was discussion about potentially pulling the house forward, or at least the garage forward outside of the 50-foot RPA. And to give a short answer, there are issues with the grading and the safety of that, and I will let the contractor elaborate on that more.
I'd also like to, and this is probably a question for the contractor rather than you, but I'd like to know how, it's sort of hard for me to tell, how much is the house and how much is the garage?
The best way I can show it is basically this entire yellow area is going to be the garage, and then the proposed residence is majority of this this orange area and maybe this corner or sliver of the yellow. Does that help?
Okay.
That's the last lot that's in that cul-de-sac, isn't it?
I'm not sure.
Any other questions for the staff? Okay, let me, at this time, I'll open the public hearing. Would the contractor like to come forward and address the board?
Good evening. Again, members of the board, Chase Grogg with Land Tech Resources, 205 Bullifonts Boulevard, Suite E, Williamsburg, Virginia. Let me try and go down some of your questions. So I kind of wrote them down in order, so we'll go that way. To start with the sewer, Mr. Rodley, yes, the sewer goes, the main line goes straight up. There's a manhole right next to the word "for" on the image you guys are looking at. It hangs a left and goes to a clean out at the neighbor's property. Our clean out is kind of diagonally to the right of lot 6, so we're showing some selective clearing to tie into that sewer line that kind of splits the wetlands. So that's where our sewer is tying into. To the best of my knowledge for the wetlands, I believe to the north is kind of a seepage because it's all dry, and then it just kind of starts coming out. And just off the page there's actually a 24-inch pipe that connects it to the BMP that then flows to another BMP. And an old AES plan that we had for, I believe it was for the sewer as-built, actually showed at one point that pipe was supposed to be removed, which would have detach that portion of the wetlands, but it's still there. And the same thing kind of for this other pocket. This other pocket goes on to the other lot to the south, which I believe is vacant, Mr. Waltrip. I believe that's going to be the last lot in here. And that all kind of expands over there into another pipe that had said that it was to be disconnected. But so that's how all of those wetlands are connected through 2 pipes into the BMP and then into kind of the Forts Colony BMP
Are those
system.
sediment basins to begin with?
I didn't find any evidence that showed that. I mean,
Why would they pipe that to the?
Because I don't know if they were driving across it, so it was maybe an old road that they were accessing to put in the sewer and stuff, and so they just installed 24-inch pipes and then left them. I don't think any of those wetlands are necessarily created from the pipe, degrading or anything like that. I think there is probably a slight seep there, and it's just wet and it's connected through some old pipes. To question about the house, yes, we pulled the house forward. Originally, our clearing limits were up to the wetlands in the rear of it. We pulled it forward, I think 5 feet, maybe even 10 feet, but I'm pretty sure it was 5 feet. Yes, there's some concern coming off of the kind of North Knob Hill there that you're driving down into it. And with with the county's new retaining wall requirements, if you go over 3 feet tall, you have to have 12 feet behind your retaining wall and 12 feet in front of your retaining wall to be able to meet all of the James City County requirements, along with a long slew of other requirements. And so we pulled it forward, but to work with the grading or anything, because we're retaining the soil on the left side, you really would kind of start hampering the lot when you start throwing in the requirements of the retaining walls. So we did slide it forward. We tried to make the grading work as much as possible to meet all of those requirements. And the question about from the house to the wetlands is about 15 feet.
Okay.
I think that was all of your original questions for staff, if you guys have any others for me. And I was trying to pull it up on my phone real quick. I don't think the garage goes quite as far as Robin stated, but I can pull them up in a few minutes and answer that question. But I would say at a minimum, it goes to the face of the porch there. And then it may be a smidge more, and then other than that, the rest of that's just the main body of the house. So it doesn't go all the way back to that 50-foot RPA line, though.
Two-car garage, I assume?
It is a 3-car garage, which was a request of the applicant. They want parking and then the space, the space to be able to put stuff, be able to have 2 cars, but be able to still have space, which was so again, originally the house was back to kind of help with the grading, and so we kind of came to a medium that, hey, the driveway is going to be a little bit steeper, but we're trying to pull it away from the resource to, make everybody, try and juggle everybody's, wants and desires for it.
And you've done all the calculations that I'm concerned about, that's a big driveway.
Mm-hmm.
But that's going to intercept all the water coming, the infiltration trench is going to be able to intercept all the.
All that water comes down, and then there's a swale that also comes around the front of the garage.
Positive note, when I looked at the soil series, this looked like Uchi soils, which is Group A.
Yeah, and the one in the front will actually be kind of installed in some fill, so we can make sure that they put some sand there to make sure that that infiltrates well. And just to say too, it was another reason we didn't go with bioretentions, because on a lot of these lots, we're getting, the bioretentions are hard because as soon as you say a bioretention, you end up 2 or 3 feet in the ground. And as soon as we go, okay, where are we daylighting a pipe? I can't go across JCSA's easement. The depth in the wetlands wasn't there. And so that's why we went with these infiltration trenches.
You're saying that this is the maximum that you can pull it forward?
Yes, I would say, because as well as, I know we have many discussions on this too, the Forts Colony has a limit on the steepness of a driveway. So we get, I honestly don't have those those numbers off the top of my head. But yes, I would, to bring the slope down, to be able to get the grading to work without having to all of a sudden, because the retaining wall on the left will all of a sudden create, we'll have to move the house 12 feet to the right to meet, because James City County, as soon as you go over 3 feet, you have to have 12 feet behind it to be able to access the wall.
And the wall will go up because the grade will increase if you move it forward.
I'm sorry, I'm missing something. Where's the retaining wall going to be?
It's right along the left property line. It's kind of the lonely yellow line.
Do we have a pointer?
Can I just walk? Can I point on? Oh, is that just? It's right over here. This yellow line right here. So it starts right at the back of the house and works its way up and turns right into the front here and stops right at this point.
Okay. All right. Now that makes more sense to me.
Well, I'll ask a question that some are probably thinking, and you touched on it, but if you were to make that a 2-car garage, does that help move the structure out of the seaward 50 foot?
It's not going to move it out of the seaward 50 feet, because if reducing your garage, you're only gaining probably 12 feet. I mean, I realize 12 feet is a decent number, but it's not, you're still going to have the direct impact on the right side there. So it's going to reduce some of the impact on the back, but we're going to have to clear back there anyways to get to the sewer lateral. So I would say your quote unquote savings would be in the back, that back left corner, but the rest of that, there's not going to be that much of a difference in shifting, that getting rid of it and making it a 2-car garage. And I know there was, just in case there's still, I know there was a question about the driveway apron. Obviously, you're not going to be able to back out of this whole thing. So again, it's kind of a maneuverability to be able to get down there, maneuver, and get back up the driveway, because that's a long way to reverse uphill.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Would anyone else like to speak on this issue? Okay, at this time, I'll close the public hearing and open it up for the board discussion.
This is another tough one because it's right, following the last case, this one's right up on the wetlands too. I would prefer to see it go to a two-car garage, just to even pull it forward, on the left side a little bit, if that would give it more room. On the positive note, it looks like the water infiltration would be better on this lot. And, Ford's Colony, it's got a gigantic BMP already in the back, plus the infiltration trenches. It looks like it could, would handle the flow.
I agree with you. I mean, I could support this except for the three-car garage. We're supposed to have the minimal amount necessary to afford relief. And, a two-car garage would allow this to be pulled a lot forward out of the
Mr. Chairman,
RPA.
Let me ask a question. Looking at the diagram, where it shows the garage and where you show your parking lot with the infiltration trench behind that, it looks like to me that your two-car garage is on your pavement. It looks like the other one is up past. It's not where you can actually put a car in that. So it looks like to me, it's a three-car garage, but it looks like to me you can only get two cars in there. Now, maybe I'm wrong on the way I'm looking at it, but just the way the ramp is going into it, I think the other is a storage area, unless you'd have to go in the garage and turn and go into it. I stand to be corrected, but I'd like to get a clarification on that for good.
That's a good point. You think you can? Okay, we'll give you a minute because that's an important point.
Mr. Chairman, I kind of, unless the question can be answered immediately.
I got it. Yeah, so.
Mr. Chair, can you please reopen the public hearing?
Oh, at this time, I'd like to reopen the public hearing.
I can email these plans to you guys so you have them as part of the record. But it is a three-car garage that stops at the front of the porch. So there's no, I can show you a picture of it if you would like.
Three-car at that.
Would anyone else like to?
Yeah, and you're gonna have to give a copy.
I will send it to them.
Okay.
That light-colored area is actually.
So the light-covered area, she has hashes for the impervious within the 100-foot RPA. That was not to delineate the garage. That was the yellow was to delineate the that was to delineate impervious in the 100-foot RPA. And so yeah, the garage starts at the front of the porch. Thank you.
Chairman, because of our conversation or discussion on this particular aspect and the opportunity to minimize encroachment, there may be other factors at play beyond just lopping off a piece of the garage and moving the house. I'd like to give the applicant time to consider those and come back to us with an answer on whether we're going to get a substantial reduction or an inconsequential reduction.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, just to be clear, the applicant can request a deferral, but the board can't superimpose one on the applicant. I will add that the public hearing has not been closed yet, so if the applicant is going to request one, now would be the time.
Unfortunately, on this one, I cannot do a deferral. I need to have it go forward as through many discussions. I mean, so again, all I can say to kind of answer that question is, a garage bay is 12 feet, so it would slide forward 12 feet. I guess I don't know off the top of my head what that, what the impervious, but the entire footprint of the house would still be within the 100 and the 50-foot RPA, all of the water draining to the exact same infiltration trenches, which all drain into a BMP, which drain into another BMP. So, so yes, that's basically the only thing I can say back to in looking at, the numbers. I don't have it off the top of my head, but that would be, basically at the end of the day, you'd be looking at, sorry, I was in the middle of 28 times 12. So you would lose 336 square feet in impervious within the resource area, because the garage is 28 feet deep, 12 feet comes off, 336 square feet is the best number I can give you at this moment.
But the house doesn't move, just the amount of garage in the landward 50 feet gets reduced.
Correct. Yeah, and as you can see too, as it curves around, it's probably going to be that 300 because it's just going to be on that left side of the house. So pretty much the entire right side of the house is still going to remain in the 50-foot RPA, and there'll be the reduction. And I fairly confidently could say that probably 300 of that would be in the 100, and the other 30 would be in a little sliver in the 50.
I don't understand why if you reduce it by one garage, why you can't pull the full structure
No, so the whole, I guess my point is the whole structure would pull forward, but your numbers within all of the areas are not going to change greatly. Or they'll change by 336 in impervious, in looking at the site as a whole, between, just impervious within the resource will be 336. The exact deviation between the landward and the 50 slightly different, but in this particular lot, it's all draining to the back. So there's no, I guess that's my own, yes, in the resource you will reduce 330 square feet, but that's the quantity I can give you.
Thank you. At this time, I'll close the public hearing again. Nope. They do not want to consider deferring this. We take it or leave it and vote on the proposal as presented to us now. Okay. Any discussion, or you want to go ahead with making a motion?
Chairman, I just would like to reiterate Mr. Dunn's comments from earlier with regard to somewhat distinction between this case and the last case. I know our proximity to wetlands is still very close, but the issue of water quality is somewhat mitigated by the more perhaps effective soils for treatment of the infiltration and the fact that we are adjacent to a stormwater management.
That sort of wins me over too. Normally, I'd really feel that should be minimized, but we are talking about a BMP. Impacts on a BMP, and I know for me, it always comes back down to, what are going to be, is it going to degrade water quality? And it may have some impacts to these localized wetlands, but,
It's Ford's Colony.
it's Ford's
I get
Colony.
it.
It's a very different situation.
It's going into a BMP too, and it's
Yeah.
not going in, so that.
Well, somebody want to make a motion?
I make a motion to adopt a resolution for the Chesapeake Bay Board to grant the exception, case number CBPA 22-0063 at 112 North Nob Hill.
We have a roll call?
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
No.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes. Okay, it's granted.
Motion carried.
Our last case is CBPA 22-0053, 1568 Harbor Road.
afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Robin Benedict, Watershed Planner. This is CBPA 22-0053. Mr. Robert and Miss Betty Ann Thompson have applied for a Chesapeake Bay exception for encroachments into the RPA buffer for the construction of a seating wall located at 1568 Harbor Road within the Governor's Land subdivision in the James River watershed. Underneath this arrow is the subject parcel in blue. The total lot size of this property is 0.3 acres, of which 60% is located within the RPA. In March 2022, officials from the James City County Stormwater and Resource Protection Division received notice that a seating wall had been constructed on this property without the submission of a Chesapeake Bay Preservation Exception request. The applicants are now proposing to gain the approval of the construction of the seating wall after the fact. In this aerial photograph, you can see the seating wall pictured here. The topography at this site, the floodplain as it affects this lot, the conservation easement which comes up to the back of the house, and the resource protection area shown in blue which comes up through the middle of the house. Total impacts to the RPA associated with this proposal equate to 45 square feet. This project will also encroach on conservation easement located behind the house. Under normal circumstances, required mitigation for this amount of impervious impacts equals the planting of 2 shrubs. Because this exception request is being heard before the board after the fact, staff would require double mitigation units equating to 4 shrubs. The applicants have already planted 4 shrubs, therefore meeting county requirements. In this site plan, used to better show you where the RPA lies on this lot, the 50-foot resource protection area shown in red, and the 100-foot resource protection area through the middle of the house shown in red, the proposed seating wall outlined here in yellow, and then the conservation area pretty equivalent with the 50-foot resource protection area at the back of the house. Here was the submitted site plan for this seating wall, obviously shown in yellow, again located at the rear of the existing house. And here is site photographs of the existing seating wall. Including the 4 shrubs required for mitigation plantings. Staff has evaluated the application and exception request for the construction of a seating wall. This application meets the ordinance conditions in sections 23-11 and 23-14 and should be heard by the board because the construction of a seating wall is considered accessory in nature. This exception request is being heard by the board after the initial construction of the project. The board may grant exceptions to section 23-7 if the application meets the following 5 conditions. The exception request is the minimum necessary to afford relief. Granting the exception will not confer upon the applicants any special privileges denied by Chapter 23, Chesapeake Bay Preservation of the James City County Code to other property owners similarly situated in the vicinity. The exception request will be in harmony with the purpose and intent of Chapter 23 of the James City County Code and is not of substantial detriment to water quality. The exception request is not based on conditions or circumstances that are self-created or self-imposed, nor does the request arise from conditions or circumstances either permitted or non-conforming that are related to adjacent parcels, and reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. Staff has reviewed the application and exception request and has determined the impacts associated with the proposal to be minor for the proposed development. Staff recommends approval for this exception request, and if the board wishes to approve the request, staff recommends the following conditions be incorporated into the approval. The applicants must obtain all other necessary federal, state, and local permits as required for the project. The exception request approval shall become null and void if construction has not begun by June 8, 2023, with written request for an extension to this exception submitted to the Stormwater and Resource Protection Division no later than April 27, 2023, which is 6 weeks prior to the expiration date. Additionally, I have a comment letter from an adjacent property owner that I'd like to read into the record. The Thompsons removed a large number of trees and shrubs from the water side of their yard and replaced them with a wall which sits in its entirety in the RPA. They apparently did not seek permission for this complete encroachment into the RPA back when they built it, as evidenced by their current request for it. Betty Ann has said that harbor residents don't want JCC inspectors to come and look closely around the harbor. She has also given us unsolicited advice concerning JCC Chesapeake Bay rules, including what plantings are permitted. Based on these and other comments by both Thompsons over the years concerning JCC rules, we submit that the Thompsons were well aware that they were violating JCC Chesapeake codes when they went ahead and built the wall. Neither the Thompsons, nor JCC, nor the Governor's Land Foundation ever asked for our opinion on the project, so until now, we've never given it. We never liked the wall. To us, it is not an attractive substitute for the natural beauty of plants. We dislike it even more now that we find it was built knowingly in violation of the JCC codes. We've always assumed that the stormwater and resource protection rules were in place because they promote a healthy Chesapeake Bay. We respect the RPA buffer rules with the belief that they will only serve their purpose if followed by everyone. We appreciate the opportunity to share our thoughts. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this time.
Pardon me, one question. What are the ramifications of building or modifying structures within the
We would have, well, Mr. Long, correct me if I'm wrong, but we wouldn't have allowed a structure within the conservation area such as this one without prior approval from the Chesapeake Bay Board for the additional RPA impacts.
And who establishes these conservation areas?
The conservation area would have been a deeded easement by the developer when they were creating this subdivision.
Just to bring some clarity, these are typically agreements between a property owner and the county that are then recorded in the land records about what the use of a property can be. So James City County would be, as the other party to the agreement, would be the one to enforce it if it so chose.
At this time, I'd like to open the public hearing. Would the applicant like to address the board?
Robert and Betty Ann Thompson, the owner of 1568 Harbor Road. When the home was constructed more than 20 years ago, could we go back to the photo, please? The slope, yeah, that one would be great. If you look at the furthest point in the photo, you see a retaining wall with trees. When they built the home, they built that stacked stone wall because it's a steep slope. I assume that's why they built it. But the one on the furthest side was in place. We bought the home several years ago, and you can see where we put the bushes on top of that stacked stone wall because it's a steep slope. Tough to cut the grass, the water would run down, there would be rivets. You go bumpity bump, erosion as you push the lawnmower, as we do. So to make it look aesthetically and to make the erosion stop, as it would always, the water after a heavy rain would run down we're on a marina, to the marina, we said, let's make a complementary and put the same thing. We matched exactly what the owner or the builder did more than 20 years ago on the other half of the house. So that's how the design came up. That's why we did it.
Well, let me say something else too. The stone wall only takes 45 square feet, according to Trevor, is that correct, roughly, of impermeable space, whatever. We didn't take plants out. We actually added 17 plants there, as you can see. Should I digress and talk about our neighbor for a second?
No. When the letter that we received stated that we put in 2 retaining walls, a patio, and the brick area all around it. None of that was true. That was all, I mean, the patio that's there, it's inside the L shape of the house. It was built more than 20 years ago. The neighbor's unhappy. So you got a
The wall has
complaint.
been there for 3 or 4 years. Well, I have to digress a little bit and talk. No, you don't want to.
We complained because they
We have
planted
an issue with
hollies.
one of our neighbors, our next
Okay,
door
well,
neighbor.
okay,
Yeah.
We don't have an issue with the other neighbor who said good things about the wall.
And they did submit a letter, and they sent an email to you on the other side saying there was no issue. I may still have a copy of the email.
Go ahead.
And if that is highly likely, and if I did for it to bring one, then I do apologize. That was not meant to
It
show.
wasn't an objection, right?
Yes, and it was not meant to show objections over the positive benefits. So I do apologize if there was a supportive letter that was not read into this record as well. However, I can look for one and then come back momentarily.
Anything else?
No, do you have any questions of us?
I don't suppose that, did you build the wall?
Yes, not the first one. We built the second one here. The one in the distance,
When you say we, did you hire a contractor to do this?
Yes.
Do you know what the name of the company was?
Yeah, Joe's Hardscape.
Okay. Thanks.
How long had the other wall been in place?
Since the house was built,
more than 20 years.
1996.
The same type of
Yes,
Exactly the
you
same,
can see
same
there-
stone.
I see
We
it over there.
copied it.
We copied it, basically.
How long is that wall roughly?
See, there you go. That's the original wall.
That's the original.
Okay, so we just made sense to make
Duplicate
it
on the
look
other
the
side of the
same.
steps.
Because that solved the erosion and the runoff down to the marina.
But the wall we built isn't as tall as that one, obviously. The wall we built is 23 inches on one end, 19 inches on the other end, and 16 inches in the middle. So it's less than 2 feet tall, if that makes sense.
You guys understand now, any work in the RPA, call the
We
county.
heard them all tonight.
Yeah, I think we're.
You got a
getting
real lesson
educated
tonight.
quickly on issues, yeah.
Your questions for the applicants?
Mr. Chair, if I may, I was able to find the letter, and if I could please read that into the record. This letter states, "We are in receipt of your letter regarding the subject property. I don't think any action is required of us, but I do want to say that Jack and I, at their address, find the hardscape in the Thompson yard to be very attractive, an overall benefit to the residents here. Of course, we all want to protect the watershed, but if that isn't at risk, we are in support of allowing the seating wall to remain."
All right, it's in the record.
We did go ahead and, after talking to Trevor and he explained to us about the RPA, we did go ahead and mitigate it. I mean, we planted plants, additional plants. We probably have more plants in our house, of the 17 houses on the marina, we have more plants and trees than anybody else from the neighborhood. So I just mentioned that.
Okay. All right, thank you. I don't see anybody else out there, so I assume there's no one else to speak on this issue. I will close the public hearing. Any discussion from the board?
Mr. Chairman, wish the county hadn't approved this portion of the governor's land project, because it just keeps coming, the gift that keeps on giving. I mean, we're not dealing with, a slight impervious associated with the footprint of the wall, but otherwise, they've created two large infiltration areas, essentially.
This is not a putting green.
I'm embarrassed to say that I actually went out on the site visit before we approved the whole project, before any of this was built. I think I did vote against it, the whole project. I saw some problems, but not to the extent it developed. Okay. Any other comments? Somebody like to make a motion?
I move to adopt a resolution to grant the exception for Chesapeake Bay Board case number CBPA-22-0053 at 1568 Harbor Road.
Small, can we have a vote, a roll call?
Mr. Roadley?
Yes.
Mr. Waltrip?
Yes.
Mr. Lukens?
Yes.
Mr. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Gussman?
Yes, motion carries. Sorry you guys had to sit through this entire meeting. That's, do we have, I don't believe we have any matters for board consideration or matters of special privilege. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We are adjourned.